Hey, how's it going? Time for another annotation review. I don't know what to call it. I'm just going to be doing some wood cutting in the background. These are all my annotation tabs for Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. A book that I enjoyed very much. I finished it very quickly just due to how I didn't quite want to stop reading. I don't have too many annotations. If you watched the last one and found it a little too long about heaven by Mieko Kawakami, then this one only has about, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something like that. But we'll get started. My first tab is on page 10, and this part of the book, spoilers by the way, all the way ahead. I'm going through all my tabs throughout the book. This part of the book, he's walking back home from going to the bar with his acquaintance. He's thinking about life. In the paragraph before my tab, he's talking about the things that he used to do during his childhood or what he's experiencing now. And I'll read the sentence and the small paragraph after. It's the beautiful thing about youth. There's a weightlessness that permeates everything because no damning choices have been made, no paths committed to, and the road forking out ahead is pure, unlimited potential. I love my life, but I haven't felt that lightness of being in ages. Autumn nights like this are as close as I get. I like this section because it has multiple. It's got like two different connotations now that I've finished the book. I know we've just started, but now that I've completed the book, it has a different connotation. Right, the book does a great job in making you kind of rethink your previous thoughts on regret and fulfillment of life and stuff like that. So, but I thought it was really good. It's definitely some foreshadowing with all the road forking out ahead mentions. But I thought it was a great section. I think now that I've finished the book, as a character he grew, and this has kind of a different meaning now to me. Because right now, the way he describes it, that he's kind of, saying there's a weightlessness because no damning choices have been made, kind of implies, right, that he feels a weight now because of his choices. Which I personally, I feel as if once I make a choice, the weight is kind of gone, right? He's speaking of, I guess, as a whole, the weight of regret, right? But I do think it's interesting. I think it speaks to his opinion that he has right this second, while walking home back to his family. My next tab is quite far ahead on page 112. Right here, we are in the perspective of Daniela, and she's speaking with Jason number 2 for the first time, or one of the first times, as he's trying to explain why he's acting differently, right? He's saying that he had somewhat of an epiphany because of almost getting hit by the car, which, is, as the reader, I really like that inclusion earlier. Maybe I should have put a tab there whenever he mentions almost getting hit by a car. But it's a nice little Easter egg for the reader, right? Because this never like comes out in any way, or but the paragraph that I tabbed was them speaking, and Jason too says, then I think of all the possible events that could have stopped this moment from ever happening, and it all feels, I don't know. And Daniela says, what? And Jason says, or Jason too says, so fragile. Now he becomes thoughtful for a moment. He says finally, it's terrifying when you consider that every thought we have, every choice we could possibly make, branches into a new world. After the baseball game today, we went to Navy Pier and then came here for dinner, right? But that's only one version of what happened. In a different reality, instead of the pier, we went to the symphony. In one, we stayed home. In another still, we got into a fatal wreck on Lakeshore Drive and never made it anywhere. And Daniela says, but those other realities don't really exist. And I won't continue read the whole book, but I really like this section because it's some of the first glimpses into Jason 2's like mind, I guess, like his train of thought, his experiences, and how he feels that he justified this situation, right? Or at least he's not justifying it, but we can start to see the thoughts that led him to be able to commit this peculiar crime. And so I really like this, saying it's so fragile, which again is kind of a naive, after reading the book, it's kind of a naive section of it, right? Or it's a naive principle saying that it's fragile because it's still operating under the fact that something can be broken, right? Like your choices can break or have the possibility to fracture your future, and I think just based on my experiences with, or at least my viewpoint or perspective on the world and life and stuff like that, I think that's kind of to me, it seems like a unhealthy way to think about it, right? And I think a lot of people would agree, if you have too much regret over what could have been, then you're going to have a pretty hard time getting through your life, right? Like every choice you make is going to be heavier. Every like small thing you do that you dislike, you're also going to be like criticizing yourself. Kind of, it kind of links me back to the quote from T.S. Eliot that was at the beginning of the book, which I believe I have. Is this Penguin? Actually, don't know. Ballantine Books. That's the version it says on here, but I think that's probably. I'm not sure, but the quote from T.S. Eliot, I liked just because it said. Of course, I lost the page the moment I went to look for the publisher. What might have been and what has been point to one end which is always present. It continues a little bit, but those are the two phrases that I think are most important, where some of the things that I've read about Buddhism as well has kind of led to this idea that we really think that we're in control of more than we actually are, and suffering over these small mistakes can lead you down like a pretty negative path, and probably a negative mindset in general too. So I thought this was a good, I at least thought it was an important section, just because we get to kind of, I don't think it's the first time, but it's one of the first times that we're getting pure Jason 2 speaking, right? Not trying to be cagey about kidnapping Jason 1. My next tab is on 203, and we are in a similar timeline right now, except, I'm sorry, we're not in a similar timeline. We are in one of the apocalypse timelines, in which the previous Jason, the apocalypse timeline in which there's quarantine, there's lockdown all over the place. There's a terrible sickness that's killing people left and right, to the point where, it's not just recommended lockdown. It's like enforced lockdown by this version of the CDC that uses force and weapons and stuff. So it's kind of interesting. But he's speaking to his wife, who earlier on this page, in fact, says that she watched our son die. I watched you die in our bed, she says. I watched my son die in his. I don't ever want to go back in that, And he gives her the drug to effectively the I forget what it's called, but the drug that kills you. I think they say in here that it's morphine, but or maybe they don't. I might be making that up from a different book I was reading. But oh no, they do. Morphine. If you give her all 5 at once, she'll slip away. Yeah, see. But my tab, I digress. My tab is right after he gives her the morphine, all 5 of them, and says, I think of all the evenings we've sat on this porch, drinking, laughing, bullshitting with the neighbors passing by as the street lamps up and down the block winked on. In this moment, my world seems so safe and perfect. I see now. I took all that comfort for granted. It was so good, and there were so many ways it could have all gone to pieces. And he's thinking about this as she slips, she slips away. And they're in the, sketchy situation because of the CDC, right? And this is to speak about that tab. I really like this section, right? It's a bit of a pivotal moment, realizing that, okay, in his head before and across the book, he starts to realize that these choices are way more than binary. He's not just like, at some point he realizes that it's not just, oh, I became a researcher and I'm super successful. And in this one, I didn't become a researcher and I'm super happy with my family, right? Like there's all these middle grounds of people dying, people divorcing, all these other sections. So this is one of the pivotal moments, right? Where it's exactly like he says, he took all that comfort for granted. So many ways it could have all gone to pieces. So I really liked that. To speak about this section, though, or this reality in general, the author did a pretty good job of making it seem like, or at least giving us the feeling of things being kind of stacked up against them, right? This whole reality hopping situation, all the way from weather being an issue to some unknown destruction and then infections, the quarantine. So this is the only one that I really felt like it was harder to suspend my disbelief about some of the ways that they made it, right? Like these are people that are enforcers of this lockdown effectively, and they found a car and effectively stole it, and it's this old, I don't know if it was a Cutlass or if that's just the last old car I saw, but it's an older car, and then they get away from this, like, effectively this police force, um and so this was just the hardest one for me to really understand, aside from the very very end, but it's not too bad. It's just, it felt like a shorter problem solving and just kind of skipping straight to the resolution. But it was an important reality because it was one of the more traumatic, right? That really shaped him into, or really shaped his mindset going forward, at least. All right, my next tab is on page 227. I think he's at about half of his, 16 ampules remaining, which means they've both, because I believe, if I remember correctly, they started at 40. But that means that, they're about halfway through their journey here. And just like I said before, I like this tab because this is where it more clearly states that these choices aren't binary, or our path in life isn't binary. Because he says, or this paragraph says, actually, I'm going to read a little bit of the previous one. I realize I've tabbed a little late here. Sitting here, I realize I've always looked at Charlie's birth and my choice to make a life with Daniela as the threshold event that caused the trajectory of our lives to swing away from success in our careers. But that's an oversimplification. Yes, Jason too walked away from Daniela and Charlie and subsequently had the breakthrough. But there are a million Jasons who walked away and didn't invent the box. Worlds where I left Daniela and our careers still amounted to nothing. Or where I left and we both found moderate levels of success but failed to set the world on fire. And you could probably guess, based on my last one, that the reason I like this part is because it's stating what that was kind of what these realities have kind of instilled in him, distilled in him. That's way too simple, and I think that most people can fall victim to this, in the sense that they can very easily say, like, oh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I? It's funny. I was talking with a friend about, we're doing the quarterly cryptocurrency discussion. Some people were talking about what they did or what they didn't do, and so that even that question can come up there as why didn't I invest, or why didn't I, even if I purchased, if any of now, even if you had purchased less than $100 of Bitcoin at the right time, you could be, millionaires, billionaires, or whatever. So those questions popped up. But uh, a friend that I know that had some success with cryptocurrency stated, the fact that just because you're in at the right time doesn't mean that you'd also be capable of holding it through its ups and downs, right? It's not binary like when you purchased it, it was $5 a piece and now it's 20,000 or whatever. No, that goes up and down on a very granular scale over and over. And most people do not have the grit, right, in order to continue gambling their money like that. And that's not like a guts thing. It's probably way more of a responsible thing, but it's just one of those. It's another example of it being a bit of an oversimplification. I think probably a lot of people have thought that at this point. Is like, why didn't I invest in crypto? Whenever everyone's got a story about how they have a friend who was just, really early into the tech or something, and they got lucky because it popped off, right? It's like, oh, why didn't I do that? And it's like, okay, well, to me, it makes it way easier to rest easily when it comes to regrets and stuff like that, because I know that it doesn't come down to a single decision. So this section is really important to Jason, and I think it's important to the reader as well, in case the reader hadn't either deduced that themselves or had the life experience to know that. All right. Shortly after, on page 230, my next tab, and this is quite the jump, because he is pretty despondent. I guess not quite yet. He's still got hope, but he's acting way more erratically. He's monitoring, as he gets closer to the reality, or closer to his reality that he knows, he's getting way weirder, I'll say it. Monitoring, even after confirming that it's not his reality, he's monitoring people. He's, like tracking them going to work and coming home. And in this instance, he calls her while she's at work just to talk to her, basically saying like, basically just to say I love you and to hear her voice, right? An understandable sentiment, but a little bit creepy, at least from my perspective. Maybe you think differently, but if you do, I would question some things for you later. Maybe if I remember that, I'll bring that back up. But my tab is the last part of this paragraph that says, I return the phone to my pocket, shivering, my thoughts running in mad directions toward dark fantasies. I see the train I'm riding into work derailing, my body mangled beyond recognition or never found. I see myself stepping into this life. It isn't mine exactly, but maybe it's close enough. And I managed to use the nice dark, or I guess it's bright red tab on this one, because this is where we as the reader begin to see that this other Jason 2, wasn't an anomaly. You can very easily see how Jason Prime, maybe that's wrong since that's got a different connotation, but Jason 1, our perspective, can slip into this mindset that Jason 2 clearly shared. it isn't mine exactly, but maybe it's close enough. So he's having these ideations now, or he's idealizing the exact same thing that happened to him. Um, if the context didn't do it great, when he says my body mangled beyond recognition, I see the train I'm riding to work. Right, he's talking about that reality's Jason. I, I assume so that he can step into this life, but and soon after I think he says even more, because he's starting to like be pretty unresponsive to Amanda, like in fact this little monitoring session and where he calls her and stuff, he spends a lot of their money on a burner phone, and he's kind of playing hooky from Amanda in the sense that he said he was just going to step out for a little bit, and he's been gone all day, just following them and looking at their life, daydreaming basically. And soon after, I think that's where they have one of their like second or the third big argument. So it's obvious that not only is it affecting him, but it's starting to affect Amanda, right? Like she thought that he had just like up and left her, right? And she was trying to search for him, like something happened to him. So yeah, uh and he, in fact, this isn't even tabbed, but I like this part. The page or two after, where he's came back to Amanda and is like basically confessing what he did, confessing that he followed them to work or whatever, followed them to the movie they went on a date with, or the restaurant, and she shows some, first she's pissed, thought that he left her, or thought that something happened to her, thought that something happened to him, and then she thinks that she's going to lose it again, but she ends up embracing him. And it doesn't say a lot about Amanda's relationship with Jason too. And I think that does a lot. It does a lot for letting the reader understand, or at least make up maybe even how it's affecting her. At least until parts like this, where sure, if I remember correctly, the only thing they mentioned is that they dated kind of on and off, but there wasn't anything incredibly serious about it, right? And Amanda says that, and you just have to believe it because that's what she tells Jason 1. But here, she kind of embraces him, and she actually helps him, and I think this is an important part where she says, "Our minds aren't built to handle this. Seeing all these different versions of your wife, I can't even imagine." And he confesses how he's thought about committing the same crime. So it's pretty cool, and I think it's also where she tells him that they're looking for a grain of sand on an infinite beach, right? Which, if anybody's looked into any videos on space, basically, then you've heard that analogy that it's like grains of sand on the biggest beach in the world, and it's still too big, probably. So that wasn't something I tapped, but as I read for it a little bit, while talking. I really like that part. And then I think the next morning, that's when Amanda leaves. Yes, and it is. My next tab is on page 240. This is, I actually don't know the amount of time after this. I'm not sure, but 2 ampules remaining. Okay, so presumably a lot of time. And he is down to his last 2 ampules. So this, from what I said earlier, this is the time where he's actually despondent. He is camping out on the street begging for money so that he can maybe afford meals or a hotel or something, or motel. And then this is the part that I tabbed. My 8th day on the streets of Logan Square, Jason Desson himself drops a $5 bill into my collection box. There's no danger. I'm unrecognizable. Sunburned and bearded and reeking of abject poverty. And he goes on to say how he makes enough to eat a cheap meal each evening and keep a few dollars. He's losing his mind. His sanity is slipping. He closes his eyes and imagines that he's in this other Jason's life. He's truly losing it. And I think that what he says, what I just said about him closing his eyes and imagining and sanity slipping, I think that kind of tells us that not only is he unrecognizable in the physical sense, but he is unrecognizable like mentally. He is lost nearly all hope, right? He has 2 ampules left, and he's not any closer than he was when he started like really nailing down the similar realities, right? This one's so close. They still have a family, they have a life. They're not, they're still together. They're not divorced. They've got their jobs and stuff. Like it's so close. But he's unrecognizable. He's been through so much, and Jason even gives him $5 in his collection box. Like it really just says, for the unrecognizable part, which is the part that I tabbed, it really just says, sunburned and bearded, and like he looks incredibly poor, right? But I think that what I really got from this is that he is no longer close to his, in quotes, normal life. He's so much different from now to the beginning of the book. And I think that's an important part, right? Because it really shows you, it's definitely the part of the book where even you're starting to lose hope, right? 2 ampules left. He's like drinking. He's spending money on unnecessary stuff, and he like he's literally in the bedroom. They're asleep, and he's standing over them. Like it's insane. So my next tab on 296, a little bit of a jump. This is after he's found his original reality, and I really should have done another tab because I just want to talk a little bit about, I don't know how I didn't see it coming, but the concept of all these forking realities, they all have this box that, this magical system in which they can change realities. And so, of course, there would be a million different versions of them, right? And so I really like that. I think this is a great end game. I much prefer this over the rest of the book just being him trying to outwit Jason too, right? Like I think that would have been a much more boring resolution or final moment, you know, even though it does kind of occur. But he has he has gotten himself arrested and made a call to Daniela to bail him out. And she does, right? Like, I think most people don't disagree with that, but he's trying to explain this. It's after he explained it. They're sitting in a public place in the mall, trying to have this conversation where they probably wouldn't encounter other Jasons. And he says, or I'll read from where I tabbed, I stare into her shimmering eyes. I say, I love you. I love you too. But so do the others, right? Just as much as you do. And this was I was so happy that Crouch explored this, because I think another author might have led us to believe that Daniela wouldn't have thought about, like, it speaks to Daniela's intelligence, I guess I should say, that she truly does understand this situation. And even though she believes that she's talking to the original Jason right now, right? Her reality's Jason. She's still thinking. She's saying, these are all other Jasons, right? Every other Jason loves me just as much as you do. And Jason doesn't have a response. And then, soon after, he asks if she's with him, are you with me? And then she makes the decision right there to say, yeah, I'm with you, And I don't know if I have a tab, but later on, she also kind of, this isn't the last that we see of her questioning this situation, but oh yeah, I do have a tab because it's the next one. But I wanted to say that I'm really happy to see that that Crouch explored that, because this to me is probably the hardest, out of this whole book to comprehend. This to me is one of the harder concepts, or the decisions, right? Like the opinions on it, because it's very easy to say that I know for a fact that this person is my Jason, right? This is my reality's Jason. So I should be with him, right? But it lends to her intelligence that her reality's Jason, and any Jason who has reached this reality again are right. It gets into your mind that they are functionally, the same, in the sense that they've only been different by days, versus the easy choice of saying Jason 1 and Jason 2. That's an easy, like, she should not be with him, right? But this is where it kind of gets you in the mindset of thinking about, like, how should this resolve? Like, maybe it was easy for me to think that before, but how could you make a choice like that? Because you're kind of damning the rest of the Jasons when you do something like that, like it's tough. But it's one of my favorite sections of the book. I love that. That's one where it's one of the parts where after I read that line, I had to kind of put the book down and really work through it, right? Because it's a little bit of a chin scratcher. My next tab is on page 318, and I've got kind of a double tab here, but they go hand in hand. So this is after they run away. Um, they they have like a nice little, you know, they've had one nice night, um, in which they go to dinner and they order food and they drink a couple beers, and um, he gets like a nice little picture or reminder of what his life used to be, even though they're in this new place. And obviously, they can't really relax because they're being pursued. Even though they do feel pretty safe at this point based on their actions. And it's after um, they become intimate again, right? After a nice night, a nice reminder, right? You're not in the middle of running away. I thought it was good. It was good timing, you know. I think that it's probably still a little optimistic based on how kind of traumatic and mind altering this all is. Especially from the perspective of Daniela. I should have tabbed a lot more. I really want to talk about other stuff. Especially from the perspective of Daniela, who has been effective, like not effectively, just duped, just straight up duped into being in a relationship with basically a different person. And while what she did at the time was consensual, I think that most people would probably agree that it wasn't really, it was way more not chill. I don't know the right word I want to say, but way way more messed up to have sex with her while she thinks that you're the real Jason, right? So it's probably, to me, it feels a little optimistic still, right? This is the first day, or this maybe the second day that they've met again, finally. And this all happens over the course of a month, right? So a month of being with this stranger that you've been tricked to believe is your partner. But it's a nice scene, and you know it's from the perspective of Jason, which I thought was interesting, since we've seen the perspective of Daniela when she had sex with Jason too, and that everything was new, and right, like that was one of the paragraphs or the chapters. So I think maybe that would have been cool here from her perspective, like basically the exact same thing that Jason's saying, where he says, it isn't like being home, it defines home, you know. Um, but it was, it's a nice moment. And this is where my tab that I actually mentioned, 318, on page 318, this is where it helps answer that question that I said I enjoyed so much, right? About the other Jasons. And it's the part where she said, I know part of our story is the electricity of our connection, but the other part is equally miraculous. It's the simple fact that you walked into my life at the exact moment you did. You instead of someone else. In some ways, isn't that even more incredible than the connection itself? That we found each other at all. And that's a great, if someone hasn't learned this lesson or thought about it, it's a wonderful connection to make, um, or to read probably, because this is true for a lot of things. For, definitely for lovers or, husbands, wives, anything like that. But also, it can be true for your friends, for your family members, right? Or your close family members that you hang out with, perhaps. Like all these people, you are so close in your life, and it's so close to not being, like, not having that outcome, because of all the different ways it could have not even happened at all. So that's wonderful. And this goes into my next tab on this page, and I'll just read to that we found each other at all, question mark. It's remarkable. What I realized is that the same thing happened yesterday. Of all the versions of Jason, it was you who pulled that crazy stunt at the dinner, or at the diner, which landed you in jail, which brought us safely together. So you're saying it's fate? She smiles. I think I'm saying we found each other for a second time. And I kind of like this, it's it's hard because you simply have to, you're kind of forced to accept this, not only because it's written and that's just reality, but also because if any other Jason had done what the first Jason did, or our perspectives Jason did, then this could have gone the exact same for that Jason, because they're so alike, they all have the exact same memories of her. So this box that's been created has caused this tragedy of all these other Jasons not finding their peace, right? And this is the sense that explains, like, why it's okay for this to happen, right? Is, I think I'm saying we found each other for a second time, so I really like these two sections. While I'm here, I do think that this was really my only hang up about some of the aspects of this book, which is I don't, it's hard for me to put in words, but it definitely makes me, like, the way that he talks, or writes, I should say, the way that he writes about relationships and women, it's a little, and this is my fault, I guess, because, this is purely on me. I'm not really blaming him at all. But I guess just because of my online presence, it really reminds me of, like, Redditors talking about women. Which maybe it's the weird bravado that Jason has, or like the kind of the confidence, right? Maybe that makes me uncomfortable for some reason that I have no clue. But like, after saying that, I think we found each other for a second time. We make love again and fall asleep. I don't know. I don't know. That's not even a real hang up, I guess. I shouldn't have fully mentioned it as a hang up, more as, like, in this writing style, if you told me that it was written, or if you didn't tell me the author, if I didn't know the author at all, and you told me it was written by uh, a woman, I would have been surprised, I guess, is what I'm saying. um, but that's just me. That's not indicative of the book's quality at all. So, my next tab on page 326. Also, looking at the time, I definitely lied about it being short. A lot of off tab topics this time. Page 326. I'll begin reading. Daniela asks, "How could you do this to me? To our family?" Talking to Jason too. Charlie appears beside his mother, taking in the horror all around us. Jason too looks at her, then at Charlie. This is a really short one. I don't have a lot to say about this, but boy, is that truly one of the shock factor moments of this book, right? Is like Charlie's having to witness this. His dad kill versions of himself, and other versions of his dad killing other versions of his dad. Like this is truly going to be, it's truly going to haunt him, right? Seeing that image, that super niche specific image that probably no one will ever be able to see unless there's unless something goes crazy with Octomom, but I don't know anything about that. But the next tab, and I believe this is our penultimate tab marker, on page 330. They are running away. They have their altercation with Jason 2. He kind of, I don't want to say helps, but he does tell him to check the glove box. They have this large confrontation that kind of it's been coming this whole time. And I think that if I had to guess, some people might have an issue with how short this resolution with Jason 2 is. I don't really know, but if I had to guess, I would say that. But like I said, I really like that it's the idea of all these other Jasons that's the problem, not necessarily Jason 2. Like it's totally shifted from what you thought the climax would look like. And maybe, dang, I should have tabbed that too, where Jason very first discovers the version, that there are different versions, right? Like it starts in the gun shop, and then he goes online and there's already this world of Jasons that's kind of begun to formulate and figure out what's going to happen. So that is such an important part of this book, where I was like, oh my God, you're so right. I spoke about it a little bit, but it's like, oh my God, you're so right. That is absolutely crazy. And I love that the climax of this book has shifted from just one person, right? But they've gotten into the car and they're driving away, and I'll start this little section. A bullet punctures the windshield and rips through the headrest an inch away from my right ear. Another muzzle flash, another gunshot. Daniela screams. How broken must this version of me be to risk hitting Daniela and Charlie? Jason tries to step out of the way a half second too late. The right edge of the bumper clips his waist, the contact devastating. And I really liked this part, not only because of that question that he posited, right? Because that, it's a great question. How broken must they be in order to... He had this whole time, when he was communicating with them and even after formulating his plan, has been operating under the assumption that every single Jason in this reality, or who has converged on this reality, has done so because of their love for Daniela and Charlie. And so he is fully confident in the idea that they are safe. In a way, obviously, like, someone might try to harm him to get to them or something, but he knows that, like, they wouldn't do anything to, or he thinks, I should say, they wouldn't do anything to hurt them. And this is his realization, where he really, and it might say later, but he really underestimated how broken some of these Jasons can be, depending on their version of how they reached this path, right? And yet again, the book kind of lets you fill that in yourself, right? Like, what else happened to these other Jasons during their path to the original reality that led them to be either this violent or this reckless, right? But it's a great section. I love that section. I'm really happy about it. And then my final tab on page 339. This was the other decision in the book that I maybe, and because we're working with, like, theoretical fiction, in the place of science, this is where I'm kind of lost a little bit, maybe, where on 339, or 338 is where the sentence starts. Daniela says, "I was thinking, all these other Jasons found their way back to their world. What's to say one of them won't find their way into wherever we end up? In theory, they all think the same way you do, right?" "Yeah, but I'm not going to open a door, and neither are you." I turned to Charlie. And so this is where you learn that this is the plan for ending this chase. For ending this chase, they're putting the decision on Charlie. But in my head, Charlie hasn't, like, in the forking realities now, there will be multiple versions of these three. So my question is the only reason they think they are safe now, after, they will be safe after letting Charlie decide, is that because the only people who have Charlie there and doing it are trying to be in a safer world, right? So I guess there won't be much more violence, probably, but I do think it's still possible they will find other other groups of three, right? Other families. Because, like, the son is gonna, all of the versions of the son are gonna make the same choice, probably, or at least similar choices. So it's not really that bad, but I guess, I just, they'll, like I said, they'll probably still run into other families, but they won't have to really worry for their life, because those families presumably just want to get somewhere safe too. But that's cool. It's a good little, it's a good solution to when does this chase end, because there are still violent Jasons out there, right, that have claimed to have killed multiple Jasons, and there's still the Jasons that accepted the idea now, but you never know if they'll accept it later, and they won't be able to follow, presumably because Charlie chose the door and because it's his will, right? I don't know the right way to word it, but since they are the object and he is making the decision, and the decision is also being they don't confirm this, I don't think, but it's being influenced by the other people inside the box since they are also the objects. So they will find a safe place to be that's unique at the very least. But yeah, that's the second to last page anyway, and it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. Um, I thought that it was very interesting. It helps it helps guide that question or guides the questions to you a lot easier than maybe some other books because I noticed that my version has a reader's guide at the back, right? Asking you the questions that maybe you miss or maybe um, you didn't think of because of the book. But I think this book did a really good job of setting things up to make you ask yourself the question, uh, you know, or maybe I'm just more interested in this subject matter than another person, right? But I thought it was great. And those are all my tabs for Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I would highly recommend it. I enjoyed it greatly. Thank you for listening if you listened all the way through. And if not, you're not hearing this. So have a wonderful day.